The second term that is translated in our English Bible as word is the term Rhema. It also has that general meaning just as logos, which means word. But most of the times when it is used in the New Testament, it is used to refer to the divine revelation of God. Now, don't get it confused with the written divine revelation that we had for logos. This is the divine revelation that a person receives in the moment. Let me give an example to make much more sense. Luke chapter 3 verse 2. Luke is introducing the ministry of John the Baptist, and this is what he says. During the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. Actually, what we read in English, the word of God, Luke uses here Rhema Theo. This was not a written word of God. In other words, there is nowhere in the Old Testament where it was written that during a certain time there will be a man named John who will start baptizing people and who will baptize Jesus later on. So how did John knew that this was the time that God was calling him to ministry? It was through this divine revelation, divine knowledge that he received at that time. Now, let me connect now what I'm saying here and what I said in the first video. Disciples, when they were writing in the New Testament about Jesus, they were quoting the Old Testament as the written logos. But they didn't only rely on that, they also had the Rhema, which was the divine revelation that they relied on to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. For instance, when Paul is talking to the Romans about the justification and salvation in Jesus alone, you wouldn't find it point blank in the Old Testament. So it took a divine revelation of God for Paul to break it down. What does that entail? Jesus is the center of the New Testament, and the Rhema that the disciples received about Jesus, which is written down to us, it forms now the Logos. In other words, rejecting the authority of the Bible, let's even say the New Testament, is clearly rejecting indirectly the divinity of Jesus. That's one thing. The second thing that I want us to note here is that every Rhema should point you to Jesus. When you receive a divine revelation that contradicts the life and the ministry of Jesus, that Rhema did not come from God. We see it here clearly that the disciples wrote about Jesus, who was the Logos. This explains also why some gospels had to be left out, because you cannot have a gospel that contradicts the life and the ministry of Jesus.